The fluorescent lights of the San Diego 5A hospital hummed their eternal monotone. February cold seeped through windows that hadn't been properly sealed since the Carter administration. In the long corridor of Ward 3B, wheelchairs lined the walls like sentries at rest, each one holding a fragment of American history that nobody bothered to read anymore. Admiral Richard Callahan walked these halls the way he'd walked 100 others. Quarterly tours, shake hands, thank them for their service. Take photos for the Naval Special Warfare Command newsletter. Routine, important work certainly, but routine nonetheless. He was 53 years old, 28 years in the Navy, and he'd commanded SEAL teams across 3 continents: Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen. He knew the weight of combat. He knew the faces of men who'd seen too much. He thought he knew every story the silent service had to tell. He was wrong. Master Chief Graham Steele walked 3 paces behind the Admiral as protocol demanded. Steele was 47, built like a fire hydrant, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left outside to weather. 23 years of service, 4 deployments. A chest full of ribbons he never wore outside of formal occasions. He'd lost count of how many hospital visits he'd done. After a while, they all blurred together, the old men in wheelchairs, the plastic flowers in cheap vases, the smell of institutional food and industrial cleaners, the quiet desperation of men who'd given every meeting and now sat forgotten in corridors that smelled like the end of the line. Steele had learned to compartmentalize it, smile, shake hands, move on. The alternative was to feel it all, and that was a luxury he couldn't afford. But today would be different. Today the routine would shatter. They passed room 317. An elderly man sleeping with his mouth open, oxygen tube taped to his face. Room 318, empty bed stripped, waiting for the next occupant. Room 319. A woman in her 70s watching a game show on mute lips moving silently along with the contestants she couldn't hear. And then room 320. The door was open. A figure sat in a wheelchair by the window, backlit by the weak winter sun. Silver hair cropped military short. Shoulders that had been broad once, now thinned by age, but still carrying themselves with a precision that spoke of decades of training that never quite left the bones. A gray V-issue sweatshirt. Sweatpants. The right leg folded and pinned at the knee. Callahan almost walked past. Almost. But something in the way the figure sat made him pause. The posture. Ramrod straight despite the wheelchair. Head up, eyes forward. Not the defeated slump of institutional care. This was different. This was a soldier at rest, not a patient giving up. Callahan stepped into the doorway. Good morning. The figure turned. Ice blue eyes met his. Eyes that didn't just look at you, but threw you past you into some distance only they could see. The face was weathered like old leather left in the sun, lines carved deep around the mouth, cheekbones sharp enough to cut shadow. A small scar above the left eyebrow, white against tan skin. This was a woman who'd lived hard and survived harder. Admiral, the voice was raspy, decades of hard use, but beneath the rasp steel. You here to thank me for my service? Callahan blinked. Most veterans lit up when an admiral showed interest. This one sounded almost amused. I am, actually, if you'll allow me the courtesy. A slight smile, no warmth in it. Courtesy, that's a word I haven't heard applied to me in a long time. Steele stepped forward, his practiced eye cataloging details. The wheelchair was standard VA issue, but it had been modified. Custom armrests, reinforced frame. This wasn't someone who'd just accepted what was given. This was someone who'd adapted, improved, overcome. Old habits. Hard to break. What's your name, ma'am? Callahan asked. Evelyn Blackwood. Captain. Retired. She paused and something flickered behind those ice blue eyes. Something dangerous. Something that had been buried for a very long time and was now considering whether to surface. But that's not what you should be asking. Callahan felt the air in the room change. Steele felt it too. The Master Chief's hand moved unconsciously to his side, a reflex from years of being ready for threats that came from unexpected directions. What should I be asking? Callahan said slowly. Evelyn Blackwood turned her wheelchair to face them fully. The movement was practiced, efficient, no wasted motion. Even at 76, even with one leg, she moved like an operator. You should be asking my call sign. The words hung in the air like smoke. Call signs weren't standard for most Navy personnel. They were a special operations thing. SEALs, air crews, the operators who worked in the shadows and needed names that meant something when radio chatter could get you killed. Callahan found himself leaning forward despite himself. All right, what was your call sign, Captain Blackwood? Those ice blue eyes held his, unblinking, measuring. deciding whether he was worthy of the answer. And then she spoke. Shadow 1. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of a hospital wing at mid-morning. This was different. This was the silence that comes when something impossible walks into the room and sits down like it owns the place. Behind Callahan, Master Chief Steele had gone absolutely still. His face had drained of color. His hand, which had been resting casually at his side, now gripped the doorframe like he needed it to stay upright. Two young SEALs who'd been accompanying them on the tour, Petty Officers Jackson and Martinez, both fresh from their first deployment, didn't understand yet. But they felt the change in atmosphere. They saw their Master Chief, a man who'd walked through Fallujah without flinching, suddenly look like he'd seen a ghost. Shadow 1, Callahan repeated. His voice had gone tight. That's a training legend, a story they tell at BUD/S. I know what they tell you, Evelyn said. Her voice was quiet now, soft, but it carried the weight of mountains. They tell you about an operator who ran solo deep reconnaissance during the Cold War. They tell you she operated alone for months at a time behind the Iron Curtain. They tell you she gathered intelligence and eliminated high-value targets in denied territories. They tell you she never existed because the missions never existed. She paused. That's what they're supposed to say. Steele stepped forward, his professional mask cracking. Ma'am, with all respect, every SEAL class hears about Shadow 1, but there's no record, no service file, no after-action reports, no proof any of it was real. Evelyn's smile was sad now, tired. Of course there's no proof, Master Chief. That was the entire point. Plausible deniability. If I got caught, if I got killed behind the curtain, the Navy could honestly say I didn't exist. No mission, no operator, no international incident during sensitive negotiations. She gestured to herself, to the wheelchair, to the empty pant leg. But I did exist. I spent 217 days behind the Iron Curtain across 13 missions. I killed 17 people with my hands and a knife. I lived in conditions that would break most men in 72 hours. And when I came back broken, when I disobeyed direct orders to save American prisoners, your government erased me. Callahan felt his heart pounding. He'd been a SEAL for 28 years. He'd commanded SEAL Team 3. He'd run classified operations across 3 continents. He knew the history of naval special warfare inside and out. And he knew that Shadow 1 was supposed to be a legend, a motivational story, an ideal to aspire to. Not a 76-year-old woman in a wheelchair at the San Diego 5. Ma'am, he said carefully, what's your real name, your service record name? Evelyn Blackwood, Captain, SEAL Team 1, 1972 to 1979. She watched his face. Go ahead, look it up. Jackson, the younger of the 2 SEALs, had already pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen, searching military databases. After a moment, he looked up confused. Admiral, I'm not finding any record of an Evelyn Blackwood in SEAL Team 1 during those years. You won't, Evelyn said. There was no triumph in her voice, only a deep, bone-tired resignation. My records were scrubbed in 1979. Part of the deal. Part of the price I paid for doing the right thing when my government ordered me to do the wrong thing. What deal? Callahan demanded. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, those ice-blue eyes seeing not just him, but through him, past him, into the decades of silence she'd carried alone. The deal that let me come home, she said quietly. The deal that kept me out of a court-martial for insubordination. The deal that erased 7 years of my life so the government could pretend I never did what they asked me to do. The deal that put me in this chair for 47 years, carrying ghosts nobody wanted to acknowledge. The hallway had gone quiet. Other veterans had stopped what they were doing. Nurses had paused mid-step. There was something about the old woman's voice, about the weight it carried, that demanded attention. Callahan pulled up a chair. Hospital furniture, plastic and aluminum. It creaked under his weight. He sat down at eye level with Evelyn Blackwood, the way you sit with someone when the conversation has moved past courtesy into something deeper. Captain, he said slowly, if what you're saying is true, if you really are Shadow 1, then you need to tell me your story. Because every SEAL who's ever gone through BUD/S has heard about you. And if you're real, if those missions actually happened, then we deserve to know. Evelyn's eyes drifted to the window, to the weak winter sun, to something far beyond the glass. You think you want to know, she said, but some stories are better left as legends. The truth is uglier, lonelier, more expensive than you can imagine. With respect, ma'am, I disagree. She studied his face, saw genuine curiosity, saw respect, saw a man who'd spent his life in the teams and understood that some stories needed to be told especially when they hurt. Finally, she nodded, slowly. All right, she said, but not here. Not in public where anyone can hear. There's a consultation room down the hall, just you and your people. And when I'm done, you'll understand why I stayed dead for 47 years. They wheeled Evelyn into consultation room B, small, windowless. The kind of room where doctors delivered bad news and social workers discussed end-of-life care. 4 chairs around a table scarred with coffee rings and the ghosts of 1,000 difficult conversations. Callahan sat across from her. Steele stood at attention behind the Admiral, hands clasped behind his back. Jackson and Martinez flanked the door, uncertain but attentive. In the harsh fluorescent light, Evelyn looked even more weathered. Every year of her 76 showed in the lines around her eyes, in the silver of her hair, in the way her hands rested on the wheelchair's armrests with a faint tremor. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. 1972, she began. I graduated BUD/S in February. They'd only just started allowing women to attempt the training, and they made it clear they didn't expect any of us to make it. Out of 11 women who started, I was the only one who finished. She paused, remembering. I was 22 years old, thought I was invincible, thought I could do anything the men could do, only better. I was wrong about the invincible part, but I was good, really good. Navigation, close quarters combat, languages. I picked up Russian and some German during advanced training. Callahan leaned forward. What happened after BUD/S? Got assigned to SEAL Team 1. Deployed to classified locations for counter-Soviet intelligence operations. This was 1972. Cold War was still cold, but it was burning hot in places the news never covered. Places behind the Iron Curtain, where Americans weren't supposed to be. Her ice blue eyes focused on something beyond the room. After 6 months in theater, they pulled me aside, said they had a special assignment, something that needed someone with my particular skill set. What kind of assignment? Steele asked quietly. The kind that doesn't get briefed to anyone except the people who need to know. Evelyn's voice carried a bitter edge now. They called it Operation Silent Shadow. The concept was simple in the way that truly terrible ideas are always simple. Insert a single operator deep into Soviet-controlled territory. No support, no backup, no extraction plan. The operator would live off the land, gather intelligence on enemy movements and installations, sabotage key targets when opportunities arose, and report back via encrypted radio bursts every 72 hours. Callahan felt cold settle into his bones. That's suicide. One person alone in denied territory with no backup. That's why they needed someone crazy enough to volunteer. Evelyn's smile was sharp as broken glass. They asked for volunteers from 3 SEAL teams. 7 of us raised our hands. She held up 7 fingers, then began folding them down one by one. They put us through another 3 months of training, survival, advanced reconnaissance, psychological conditioning. They wanted to see who would break, who would quit, who would actually be capable of operating alone in hostile territory for weeks or months at a time. 6 fingers down, 1 remaining. By the end, only 2 of us were left, me and a Marine named Jamie Brennan. The way she said his name, Jamie Brennan, carried a weight that made everyone in the room lean forward unconsciously. Tell me about Brennan, Callahan said softly. Evelyn's hands, which had been resting steady on the armrest, began to tremble. Not with age, with memory. Jamie was 24, Marine Recon, best natural operator I ever saw. He could read terrain like it was a book written just for him. Could move through a forest without disturbing a single leaf. Could blend into a crowd so perfectly you'd look right past him even when you knew he was there. Her voice softened. He was also the kindest person I'd ever met in the teams. Most operators back then, they had something to prove. Especially around me, the only woman. They were always testing, always pushing, always trying to prove they were tougher, harder, better. But not Jamie. He treated me like a teammate, like an equal, like someone who'd earned her place. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. We became friends during training. Close friends. The kind of friends you make when you're both staring into the abyss and realizing you might not come back from what they're asking you to do. We'd sit up at night after training, too tired to sleep, too wired to rest, and we'd talk about everything: family, home, why we volunteered for something this insane. What did you tell him? Martinez asked. Why did you volunteer? Evelyn turned those ice blue eyes on the young petty officer. Because I was 22 and angry, and tired of people telling me what I couldn't do because I was a woman. Because I wanted to prove I was as good as any man. Because I thought that if I could do this impossible thing, then I'd finally earn the respect I'd been fighting for my entire career. She looked down at her hands, at the tremor that wouldn't quite stop. I was an idiot, but I was a committed idiot, and so was Jamie. Steele spoke up. What happened to Brennan, ma'am? The room seemed to grow colder. They asked for a volunteer to run the first shadow mission. Jamie raised his hand before I could. Said someone had to go first, might as well be him. Said I should watch and learn from his mistakes, so I'd do better when my turn came. Evelyn's jaw tightened. They deployed him to Eastern Europe, Soviet satellite state. Can't tell you which one's still classified even now. His mission was to gather intelligence on Warsaw Pact troop movements and logistics. 14-day insertion, solo, deep behind the curtain. She stopped, closed her eyes. He lasted 11 days. The silence in the room was absolute. What happened? Callahan asked, though he already knew the answer would be terrible. Evelyn opened her eyes. They were wet now, but no tears fell. After 47 years, she'd learned how to cry without letting the tears escape. The KGB caught him. We don't know exactly how. The intelligence reports we got later, years later after the Cold War ended, and some files were declassified, suggested he'd made contact with a local asset who turned out to be a double agent. Or maybe he was just unlucky. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong face seen by the wrong person. Her voice went flat, emotionless. The way operators talk about trauma when they can't afford to feel it. They tortured him for 3 days, basement of a KGB facility. They wanted him to admit he was American military, to reveal the program, to give them anything they could use for propaganda or leverage. The reports describe methods I won't repeat in this room. She looked at each of them in turn. Jamie never broke. 3 days of torture and he never said a word. Never confirmed he was American. Never revealed the program. Never gave them anything except his silence. Martinez had gone pale. Jackson was gripping the doorframe. On the 3rd day they executed him, single shot to the back of the head, left his body in a field outside the city as a warning. It took 6 months for the CIA to confirm it was him through dental records. Evelyn's voice cracked just slightly. Officially, Lieutenant James Brennan died in a training accident at Marine Corps Base Quantico. His family was given a closed casket and a folded flag. They never knew what really happened. They never knew their son died a hero behind enemy lines. They never knew he endured torture that would break most men and never said a single word. She reached into the pocket of her sweatshirt and pulled out a small wooden box. Worn, old, the kind of box that had been carried for decades. She opened it. Inside, on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single dog tag. Brennan James M. OPOSUSMC. I wasn't supposed to have this, Evelyn said quietly. It was recovered with his body. Should have been sent to his family, but I couldn't let him go. I took it before it was filed away in some CIA archive. I've carried it for 54 years. Callahan stared at the dog tag, at this small piece of metal that represented a man who died alone and afraid and brave beyond measure. After Jamie died, Evelyn continued, they asked if I still wanted to volunteer. If I still wanted to run shadow operations knowing what had happened to him. She looked up. Her ice blue eyes were hard now, resolved. I said yes. Why, Steele asked. Why would you volunteer after watching them send your friend to die? Evelyn's smile was sad and fierce all at once. Because Jamie died for nothing if I walked away. Because someone had to finish what he started. Because I was young and stupid and angry and I thought I could do better than he did. Thought I could survive where he didn't. She closed the wooden box gently, reverently. They gave me the call, signed Shadow 1, see? Gave me 3 weeks to prepare. And then they sent me where Jamie had died. She paused and her voice dropped to barely a whisper. That's when I learned what hell really means. The consultation room felt smaller now, the air thicker. Callahan loosened his tie without realizing he was doing it. Steele had shifted his weight, his professional mask cracking to show something underneath. Concern, horror. A dawning realization that the legend they'd heard whispered about in training was sitting in front of them, real and scarred, and carrying burdens that should have broken her decades ago. Evelyn looked at the 4 men surrounding her and made a decision. You want to know about Shadow 1, I'll tell you, but I'm not going to romanticize it. I'm not going to make it sound noble or heroic or anything except what it was: brutal, lonely, and more expensive than anyone should have to pay. She shifted in her wheelchair, and for just a moment, everyone in the room could see the phantom pain cross her face. The leg that wasn't there anymore still hurt. 47 years later, it still hurt. My first mission was winter 1973, Arctic insertion. They flew me into Norway on a civilian aircraft, moved me to a fishing boat, then transferred me to a submarine that dropped me 2 miles off the Soviet coast. Her eyes focused on the middle distance, seeing not the consultation room, but a frozen landscape half a century gone. -40 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold enough that your breath freezes in your lungs. Cold enough that exposed skin dies in minutes. Cold enough that all your fancy gear fails and all you have left is knowledge and will. She looked at Jackson and Martinez. You boys ever done Arctic warfare training? They both nodded. Then you know it's hell. Now imagine doing it alone for 3 weeks with no support, no backup, no one coming to save you if you fall through ice or get caught in a blizzard. Her voice took on a rhythmic quality now. The cadence of someone who'd told this story to herself 1,000 times in the dark. I was inserted at 0200 hours. Swam 2 miles through water cold enough to stop your heart. Made shore, buried my wetsuit. Changed into cold weather gear that made me look like a Finnish aid worker. Checked my compass. Started walking. What was the mission objective? Callahan asked. Soviet colonel named Dmitry Volkov, KGB, oversaw the Gulag system in the Northern Territories. High-value target. The CIA wanted him eliminated, but they couldn't do it officially. That's where operators like me came in. Plausible deniability. She said the words like they tasted of ashes. I spent 12 days tracking him. Learned his patterns, his routines. Where he lived, where he worked, who he talked to. I posed as a Finnish aid worker attached to a refugee assistance program. Got access to areas most people couldn't reach. Got close enough to see into his office windows with binoculars. And Steele prompted when she paused. And I saw the photos on his desk. Wife, 2 daughters, maybe 8 and 10 years old, smiling at the camera the way kids do when they don't know the world is cruel. Evelyn's hands tightened on the armrests. I had 2 sisters back home, same ages, looked a lot like Volkov's daughters, actually. Blonde, blue eyes, big smiles. The room was silent. I almost didn't do it. Almost called it in, told them the mission was compromised, extracted early. Because I kept thinking those girls are going to lose their father. Some morning they're going to wake up and he won't be there anymore. And they'll never understand why. She looked at Callahan. But then I thought about the gulags he oversaw. About the thousands of people who died in camps he managed. About the families who lost fathers and mothers and children to his orders. About whether a man who did that work deserved to go home to his daughters every night and pretend he was just a civil servant. What did you decide? Martinez asked quietly. I decided that war doesn't care about fairness. I decided that sometimes the right thing is also the terrible thing. I decided that I was 22 years old and way out of my depth, but committed to the mission anyway. She took a breath. On day 13, I made my move. Volkov was diabetic, took insulin every morning. I'd observed the routine through his office window. I broke into his office at night. Lockpicking was one of my specialties. Found his insulin in the office refrigerator. Replaced it with a solution that would cause hypoglycemic shock. Her voice went clinical now, detached, the only way to tell it without breaking. Next morning, he took his dose like always. Within 2 hours, he collapsed, dead before the ambulance arrived. A heart attack brought, by diabetic crisis, the coroner said. Tragic, unexpected, no signs of foul play. She paused. I was 3 miles away by then, extracted through the same route I'd entered, swam back to the submarine pickup point, made it back to Norway, flew home. How did you feel? Jackson asked. Evelyn looked at the young SEAL with something like pity. I threw up for 6 hours straight when I got back to the safe house. Couldn't eat for 3 days. Couldn't sleep without seeing those 2 little girls' faces. The photos from his desk, the way they smiled. She held up her hands. They were shaking worse now. I killed a man while his daughters slept 3 rooms away. I took their father from them. Maybe he deserved it. Maybe he was a monster. Maybe the world is better without him. But those girls didn't get a vote. They just woke up one morning and their daddy was gone. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, slow and silent. People ask me if I regret my first kill. Wrong question. The right question is, do I carry him? Do I remember his name? Do I think about those daughters? She looked each of them in the eye. His name was Dmitry Volkov. His daughters were named Anya and Katerina. And I think about them every single day. Because forgetting them, forgetting what I did, would make me the monster, instead of just the soldier who did monstrous things because someone ordered me to. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Callahan realized he was gripping the edge of the table hard enough that his knuckles had gone white. Steele had taken off his cover and was holding it in both hands, twisting the fabric unconsciously. Jackson and Martinez both looked like they'd just had their understanding of warfare fundamentally rewritten. That was mission number 1, Evelyn said. I had 12 more to go. She looked at them and smiled. It was the saddest smile Callahan had ever seen. Still think you want to hear about Shadow 1? Nobody answered, but nobody left either. And Evelyn Blackwood, 76 years old, one leg carrying the weight of 54 years of silence, continued her story. Because some truths once started demand to be finished. Evelyn reached for a glass of water on the table. Her hands shook as she lifted it, and some of the liquid sloshed over the rim. She didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she'd stopped caring about such small failures a long time ago. After Volkov, she said, setting the glass down. They sent me out again and again. Mission 2, Mission 3, different locations, different targets, same isolation. By Mission 4, I'd stopped feeling much of anything during the operations. I'd go in, do the job, come out. Clinical, efficient, empty. She looked at the water glass at the small puddle forming on the table. That's when I knew I was in trouble. Because the day you stop feeling what you're doing, the day killing becomes just another task on the checklist. That's the day you stop being human and become something else. Something dangerous in a different way. Callahan leaned forward. How many missions did you run before they pulled you back? They didn't pull me back. I ran 13 missions over 7 years. Some were short, 2 or 3 weeks. Some were longer. Her eyes went distant again. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand what happened to the others first. You need to know about Becca. The way she said the name soft and broken made everyone in the room understand that this story would hurt worse than the others. Who was Becca? Steele asked gently. Evelyn opened the wooden box again. Beside Jamie Brennan's dog tag lay another. This one smaller, more delicate, but stamped with the same brutal efficiency of military identification. Thornton Rebecca a POS USN. Captain Rebecca Thornton, Shadow 3, 26 years old, Navy Intelligence. Evelyn's voice carried a reverence now, the way you speak of the dead when the grief is still fresh even after decades. She was my roommate during training. Before they narrowed it down to me and Jamie, there were 7 of us. Becca was the smartest person in that group by a mile. She ran her finger along the dog tag's edge. She could speak 5 languages fluently: Russian, German, Polish, Czech, and Mandarin. Had a photographic memory. Could look at a document once and recite it back word for word 3 days later. The CIA wanted her bad, but she chose to be an operator instead of an analyst. Said she didn't want to watch the war from a desk. A sad smile crossed Evelyn's face. We became close during training. Late nights when we couldn't sleep, we'd sit outside and talk. She told me about growing up in Vermont, about her father who'd been a college professor, about how she'd joined the Navy to prove she was more than just a smart girl with a pretty face. We'd laugh about the instructors who couldn't hide their disbelief that women were even attempting the program. We made a pact whoever survived would make sure the other was remembered. Her smile faded. Spring of 1974. They needed someone for urban infiltration. Eastern European capital. Can't tell you which one's still classified. The mission was to pose as a Canadian journalist, infiltrate diplomatic circles, gather intelligence on Soviet weapons development programs. Deep cover, 6 to 8 weeks. Evelyn's hands tightened around the dog tag. Becca volunteered. She was perfect for it. Languages, intelligence background. She could blend into high society the way I could disappear into wilderness. They inserted her with a Canadian passport, press credentials, the whole cover story built out months in advance. What went wrong? Martinez asked. We don't know exactly. Maybe someone made her. Maybe her contact was compromised. Maybe she just had bad luck. Evelyn's voice went hollow. She made it 4 weeks. Her last radio transmission was at 0340 hours on a Tuesday morning. 5 words: compromised. They know. Going dark. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. That was the last anyone heard from her. No more transmissions. No extraction. No body. Nothing. Evelyn looked up and her ice blue eyes were filled with something terrible. Not tears. Something worse. The absolute emptiness of grief that had nowhere left to go. The CIA spent 2 years trying to find out what happened. After the Cold War ended, some Stasi files were declassified. They found references to a Canadian journalist arrested on suspicion of espionage. They found interrogation logs. They found an execution order. She stopped, breathed, continued. They never found her body, probably buried in an unmarked grave somewhere, or cremated, or dumped in a river. We'll never know. Jesus, Steele whispered. The official record says Captain Rebecca Thornton went missing during a training exercise. Presumed drowned. Her family got a memorial service with an empty casket. Evelyn's jaw clenched. Her mother asked me at the funeral if I thought Becca suffered. I lied and said no. I said it would have been quick, painless. She held up the dog tag. 3 years after she disappeared, I volunteered for a mission in the same region. It wasn't part of the objective, but I spent an extra 3 weeks beyond my extraction date searching. I found her safe house, found the basement room she'd been using, found blood on the walls, found signs of a struggle. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. And I found these, her dog tags. She'd hidden them in a crack in the floorboard. Probably knew they were coming for her. Probably wanted to leave something behind so someone would know she'd been there, that she'd existed, that she'd mattered. Evelyn's tears were falling freely now, cutting tracks through the weathered landscape of her face. I never reported finding them. If I had, they would have taken them, filed them away in some CIA archive, and Becca would have disappeared twice, once from the world and once from memory. She placed the dog tag back in the wooden box with infinite care. I've carried her for 52 years. Every mission I ran after that, I carried her with me. Jamie and Becca both. My ghosts, my companions, the friends who died while I survived. Jackson spoke up, his young voice uncertain. Ma'am, why did you keep going? After Brennan died, after Thornton disappeared, why didn't you quit? Evelyn looked at him with something like pity. Because quitting would mean they died for nothing. Because someone had to finish the work they started. Because I was in too deep to turn back and too committed to walk away. She paused. And because 2 more shadow operators had just entered the program, and I'd be damned if I let them die without learning everything I could teach them about staying alive. Callahan felt his chest tighten. Who were they? Chief Petty Officer William Ashford, Shadow 4, and Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Drake, Shadow 5. Evelyn's expression softened just slightly. Will and Harry, they saved my life in ways they never knew about. She settled back into her wheelchair, and for the first time since she'd started talking, something other than grief crossed her face. Something that might have been warmth, if warmth could survive 50 years of cold. Will Ashford was 28 when he entered the program. SEAL Team 2, Master of Disguise and Adaptation. He could become anybody, blend into any environment. Had this theory he called the gray man. The idea was that if you wanted to disappear, you didn't try to be invisible. You tried to be forgettable. The most average, boring, unremarkable person in any room. A real smile touched her lips now. He'd practice it on the instructors, walk into briefings dressed as a janitor and clean around them while they discussed classified operations. Half the time they'd keep talking like he wasn't even there. When he'd reveal himself, they'd be furious, but they couldn't deny it worked. Steele shook his head in disbelief. That's bold. That's Will. He ran 9 missions over 14 months. Every single one successful. Never compromised, never caught, never even suspected. He'd go into Soviet-controlled cities, gather intelligence, sabotage targets, and walk out like he was just another local going about his business. Evelyn's smile faded. He taught me everything he knew. We'd spend hours between missions, and he'd show me techniques. How to change your walk so people wouldn't recognize your gait. How to alter your posture to seem older or younger. How to use makeup and prosthetics that would survive field conditions. How to become someone else so completely that even you almost forgot who you really were. Sounds like a good operator, Callahan said. The best I ever worked with. Better than me in a lot of ways. Evelyn's hands trembled again. On his 10th mission urban environment, he got caught. We never found out exactly how. Maybe someone recognized him from a previous operation. Maybe his cover story had a flaw. Maybe he just ran out of luck. Her voice went flat again. They tortured him for information. The reports we got later said he lasted 4 days. Never revealed his real identity, never compromised the program, never gave them anything except false information that sent them chasing a ghost. She looked down at her hands. On the 4th day, they executed him. Unlike Becca, they returned his body through the Red Cross. Official cause of death, training accident. And Drake? Steele asked. Harry Drake was different. Older. 30 years old when he joined, which made him ancient by operator standards. He came from Delta Force, which made him a unicorn in a Navy program. But the CIA requested him specifically because he brought something we didn't have: military tactical precision applied to lone operator doctrine. Ooh, Evelyn's eyes lit up slightly, the way veterans' eyes do when remembering someone who taught them something vital. Harry was a planner. Where Will was all improvisation and adaptation, Harry was methodical. He created what he called the survival priority matrix, a decision tree for what to sacrifice first when you got compromised. Equipment before intelligence. Intelligence before mission success. Mission success before life. But above all, never compromise the program. Never let them prove we existed. She pulled out a small, battered notebook from her sweatshirt pocket. The cover was stained with what might have been blood, might have been mud, probably both. He wrote it all down, every technique, every lesson learned, every close call, and how he survived it. Made me promise that if he died, I'd make sure his knowledge didn't die with him, that future operators would learn from his mistakes and his successes. Callahan reached for the notebook. Evelyn handed it over carefully like it was made of something more fragile than paper. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, diagrams, notes, tactical breakdowns, a lifetime of knowledge compressed into 100 pages of field notes. Harry ran 7 missions. The 7th one was supposed to be routine. Middle Eastern theater. Intelligence gathering on weapons shipments. 3-week insertion. Evelyn's voice cracked. He was ambushed on day 19. Firefight in a marketplace. He killed 3 hostiles, wounded 2 more, but took multiple rounds. Made it half a mile before bleeding out in an alley. She took the notebook back from Callahan, held it against her chest. A local found his body 3 days later. No identification, no way to trace him. He'd followed his own protocol, destroy everything that could compromise the program before you die. They buried him in an unmarked grave. His family was told he died in a helicopter crash during a training exercise. The weight of the losses was suffocating now. Jamie Brennan, Rebecca Thornton, William Ashford, Harrison Drake. 4 operators dead or missing. 4 families told lies. 4 funerals with wrong stories or empty caskets. That notebook, Evelyn said quietly, is the only thing Harry left behind. His entire life's knowledge as an operator. I used his techniques on every mission after he died. And when I finally got out, when they erased me and I disappeared into the VA system, I kept trying to find someone to give it to. Someone who could make sure his knowledge lived on. She looked at Callahan. Until today, I didn't know if anyone would ever see it. Didn't know if everything he learned would die with me. Master Chief Steele stepped forward, his professional mask completely gone, now replaced with raw emotion. Ma'am, that notebook needs to be in the training curriculum. It needs to be taught to every SEAL candidate. If what you're saying is true, if those techniques are in there, they could save lives. I know, Evelyn said simply. That's why I've kept it for 49 years, waiting, hoping that someday someone would listen. She placed the notebook on the table between them. Will and Harry died in 1976. I ran 4 more missions after they were gone. 4 missions carrying 3 ghosts. Jamie, Becca, Will, Harry. All of them dead because they volunteered for something impossible. All of them better operators than me in different ways. All of them gone while I survived. Her ice blue eyes were haunted now. You know what the worst part is? It wasn't that they died. We all understood the risks. We all volunteered knowing we probably wouldn't come back. The worst part was that when they died, nobody could acknowledge it. Their families couldn't know the truth. Their teammates couldn't honor them properly. They just disappeared, like they'd never mattered at all. She looked at the wooden box with the dog tags, at the notebook with Harry's handwriting, at the tangible proof that her friends had existed and died and left pieces of themselves behind. I promised them I'd remember. I promised I'd make sure someone knew what they did, what they sacrificed, how they died, trying to do impossible things for a country that couldn't acknowledge their service. Her voice broke completely now. I've spent 50 years keeping that promise alone, carrying them alone, remembering alone, because nobody else could know. Nobody else was allowed to know. The room was silent except for Evelyn's ragged breathing and the distant sounds of the hospital beyond the door. Finally, Callahan spoke. Tell us about the rest, Captain. Tell us what happened after they died. Evelyn wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a shaky breath, straightened in her wheelchair with the same military bearing that had never quite left her bones. After Will and Harry died, they should have shut down the program. 5 operators, 4 dead or missing. Any sane person would have called it. But this was 1976 and the Cold War was heating up, and the CIA had gotten used to having lone operators who could go places nobody else could reach. She laughed bitterly. So they sent me back out. Mission after mission. I stopped counting after a while, stopped caring. Just went where they pointed me and did what they asked and came back emptier than when I left. Her hands gripped the armrests. Then came Mission 11, summer of 1978. They told me it was a long-duration operation. Deep insertion into Soviet-controlled territory. The mission objective was to map a suspected nuclear facility, gather intelligence on weapons development, and report back with detailed reconnaissance. She paused. They told me it would be 6 weeks, maybe 8. Her ice-blue eyes went distant, seeing something far beyond the consultation room walls. It ended up being 89 days. The number hung in the air like a physical thing. 89 days alone. No contact except radio bursts every 72 hours. 89 days in conditions that should have killed me in the first week. 89 days where I stopped being Evelyn Blackwood and became something else. Something that could survive where humans couldn't. She took a breath. They inserted me in a desert region. During the day, temperatures would hit 120 degrees. At night, when I moved into the mountain areas surrounding the facility, it would drop below freezing. My body couldn't regulate anymore after the first month. I'd shake all day from the heat, shake all night from the cold, and somewhere in between, I'd forget what it felt like to be comfortable. Evelyn's voice took on a rhythmic, hypnotic quality. The cadence of trauma recalled. Water was the first problem. I started with 2 liters, rationed it to last 3 days until I could find a source. Found a stream on day 4, but it was contaminated with something that made me violently ill for a week. After that, I learned to drink whatever I could find and just accept that I'd be sick most of the time. What did you eat? Jackson asked, horrified fascination in his voice. Anything that moved. Scorpions, snakes, rats if I was lucky, insects, roots, plants that I tested by rubbing on my skin first to see if they'd kill me. One time I found a dead bird. Don't know what killed it, but I was hungry enough that I didn't care. Ate it raw because fire would give away my position. She saw the disgust on their faces and smiled grimly. You think that's bad? That was the easy part. The hard part was staying sane. Her smile faded. By day 47, my radio malfunctioned. Sandstorm damaged the antenna. I couldn't transmit, couldn't receive. For 8 days, I had no contact with command. No way to know if they thought I was dead. No way to know if they were sending extraction or if I'd been abandoned. Evelyn's breathing had gotten faster, shallower. Even 50 years later, the memory of that isolation was enough to trigger something visceral. Day 53, I started hallucinating. Saw Jamie Brennan sitting across from me in a cave asking me why I'd let him die. Saw Becca standing in the desert pointing towards something I couldn't see. Saw Will and Harry arguing about the best extraction route even though they'd been dead for 2 years. Her hands were shaking badly now. Day 67, I realized I couldn't remember what my mother's voice sounded like. Couldn't remember the last conversation I'd had with her. Couldn't remember anything except the mission and the heat and the cold and the endless, crushing loneliness. She looked at them with eyes that had seen too much and survived it anyway. Day 73, I stopped talking altogether. Not because I was trying to stay quiet, because there was no point in talking when nobody could hear me, when even my hallucinations had stopped answering back. Martinez had tears running down his face. Jackson looked like he might be sick. Steele's jaw was clenched so tight the muscles stood out like cables. Day 81, I completed the mission objective, had all the intelligence they needed. Should have moved to the extraction point immediately, but I didn't. Evelyn's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I stayed out there for 8 more days, just existed. Because going back meant being around people again, and I didn't know if I could remember how to do that. Didn't know if the person I'd been 89 days ago still existed, or if she'd died somewhere in the desert and left behind something else wearing her face. She closed her eyes. Day 89, the extraction helicopter landed. I walked out of the desert having lost 31 pounds off a frame that had started at 140. I looked in the mirror at the safe house and didn't recognize the person staring back. Sunburned until my skin had cracked and bled. So dehydrated that my eyes had sunk into my skull. So thin that every bone showed. Her eyes opened and they were wet again. But the worst part wasn't what I saw in the mirror. It was what I felt. Or rather, what I didn't feel. Nothing. No relief at being extracted, no joy at surviving, no fear or anger or sadness. Just emptiness. Like 89 days alone had hollowed me out, and there was nothing left inside except the mission and the ghosts. She looked at each of them in turn. It took me 2 years to learn how to be around people again. 2 years of jumping at every sound. 2 years of forgetting how to have conversations that weren't mission briefings. 2 years of panic attacks in crowded rooms because too many people felt like a threat instead of safety. Evelyn straightened in her wheelchair. People think 89 days alone is impressive. It's not. It's traumatic. It's damaging in ways that don't heal. I came back from that mission broken in ways that Will's techniques and Harry's protocols couldn't fix, broken in ways that are still broken today, 50 years later. She paused, but I went back out anyway, because they needed me, because the war needed me, because I didn't know how to be anything except Shadow One anymore. Callahan's voice was rough when he spoke. How many more missions? 4. Missions 12, 13, 14, and 15, each one a little harder, each one taking a little more of whatever was left of Evelyn Blackwood and replacing it with Shadow One. Her ice-blue eyes were hard now, resolved. Mission 13 should have been routine, standard reconnaissance, 4 weeks in and out, simple. She laughed, and it was a terrible sound, but it wasn't simple because I found something I wasn't supposed to find. And when I reported it, when I asked for help, my government told me to walk away. Her hands gripped the armrest so tight her knuckles went white. That's when I learned that some orders are illegal, some orders are immoral, and some orders need to be disobeyed no matter the cost. She looked at Admiral Callahan with eyes that had made the hardest choice a soldier can make. That's when I stopped being Shadow One and became a traitor. At least that's what they called me when they erased me from existence. The room held its breath. You want to know the rest? Evelyn asked. You want to know what I did that was so terrible my own government made me disappear? Nobody spoke, but nobody looked away either. And Evelyn Blackwood, 76 years old, carrying 50 years of silence, and the ghosts of 4 dead friends, told them about the day she chose to disobey. The day that cost her everything and saved 2 lives. The day that proves some prices are worth paying even when you pay them alone for half a century. Evelyn's hands had stopped shaking. When you're about to confess the thing that destroyed your life, trembling seems almost disrespectful to the weight of what you're carrying. Early 1979, she began. They sent me on what they said would be my last mission. I'd been running operations for 7 years. I was 30 years old and felt 60. They could see I was burning out. Hell, I could see it too. So they promised this would be the end. One more job, then I could come home for good. She laughed bitterly. Funny how promises work when the government makes them. Callahan leaned forward. What was the mission? Standard reconnaissance. Soviet logistics base in a remote region. They wanted intelligence on supply routes, troop movements, equipment transfers. 4 weeks in and out. Clean, simple. The kind of mission I could run in my sleep by that point. Her ice-blue eyes went distant. I inserted on schedule. Reached the primary target on day 3. Spent a week gathering intelligence, photographing documents, mapping the facility. By day 11, I had everything they'd asked for. Should have moved to extraction immediately. She paused. But something felt wrong. There was too much security for a simple logistics base. Too many patrols in areas that didn't have strategic value. So I expanded my reconnaissance perimeter, went 3 miles beyond the target zone. Her voice dropped. That's when I found it. Hidden compound. Small. Maybe a dozen buildings. Surrounded by wire fencing and guard towers. I set up observation from a tree line 500 yards out and watched through binoculars for 6 hours. Evelyn closed her eyes, but Callahan could see her eyes moving beneath the lids, like she was watching it all happen again. At 1400 hours, they brought the prisoners out for exercise. 3 men, American. I could tell by the way they moved even from that distance. Could tell by the haircuts, the build, the way they held themselves, despite obvious malnutrition and injuries. Her eyes opened. Staff Sergeant Thomas Hayes, Corporal Daniel Williams, Private First Class Andrew Carter. I found out their names later, but in that moment, all I knew was that they were mine. American soldiers in Soviet custody. Alive. Caged. Left behind. The room was absolutely silent. I radioed command immediately, sent encrypted burst transmission with coordinates, prisoner count, security assessment. Requested immediate extraction team. This was huge. POWs that everyone thought were dead actually alive. This was the kind of intelligence win that could change negotiations, shift policy, bring people home. Her hands gripped the armrests again. I waited for response. Standard protocol was 12 hours for mission change authorization. I waited 24. Nothing. Sent another transmission. Waited. Nothing. Evelyn's jaw clenched. 48 hours after initial contact, I finally got response. 2 words. Mission scrubbed. She looked at Callahan with eyes that had seen betrayal from the people who were supposed to have her back. I sent back clarify. 3 American POWs confirmed alive. Request extraction team immediately. Her voice took on the flat affect of someone reciting dialogue they'd memorized through repetition of nightmare. Response came back, negative extraction. Too close to diplomatic negotiations with Soviets. Cannot risk international incident. Exfiltrate immediately. Destroy all evidence of POW discovery. This is a direct order. Martinez made a sound like he'd been punched. I couldn't believe it. Sent back requesting confirmation. We are abandoning American soldiers. Evelyn's voice went hard as steel. The response was affirmative. POW extraction not authorized. Diplomatic considerations that take priority. Extract immediately or face court-martial for insubordination. End transmission. She looked at each of them. So I had a choice. Follow orders, destroy the intelligence exfiltrate, come home safe and spend the rest of my life knowing I left 3 American soldiers to rot in Soviet custody because my government valued diplomatic negotiations over their lives. Her ice blue eyes burned now. Or disobey direct orders, attempt a solo rescue, with no support and no backup, probably die trying, and if I survived, face court-martial in prison. What did you do? Steele asked, though the answer was written all over her face. I thought about Jamie Brennan, about how he died alone behind enemy lines because I wasn't there to back him up. I thought about Becca Thornton, about how she disappeared and nobody came for her. I thought about Will Ashford and Harry Drake, about how they died doing impossible things because someone had to. She took a breath. And I thought I didn't survive 7 years and bury 4 friends to become the kind of person who abandons brothers in cages. Evelyn's voice was steady now, clear, resolved in a way that comes only from decisions that cost everything. I sent one final transmission. With all due respect, sir, I didn't spend 217 days behind enemy lines to become someone who leaves Americans to die. Shadow 1 is going dark. Out. She mimed, crushing something in her hand. Then I smashed the radio, because if I kept it, I might change my mind. Might listen to them ordering me back. And I knew if I listened too long, I'd obey. So I destroyed my only link to command and committed fully to a course of action that would either save 3 lives or end mine. Callahan felt something cold settle in his chest. You went after them alone. I went after them alone, spent 3 days planning. 1 woman with 1 rifle against a fortified compound with 20+ guards. I used every technique Will Ashford taught me about blending in. Used every tactical principle Harry Drake had written in his notebook. Used 7 years of experience operating in impossible situations. Her eyes took on a distant quality, seeing not the consultation room, but a compound half a world away and nearly half a century gone. 0200 hours on the 4th day I made my move. Guard shift change. Moment of minimum visibility. I cut through the perimeter fence using wire cutters I'd fashioned from materials I found. Moved through the compound using shadows and timing I'd mapped over 72 hours of observation. She spoke faster now, the words coming in the rhythm of action recalled. Reached the prisoner cages at 02:15. 3 men in separate cells, malnourished, beaten, but alive. I approached Hayes's cage first. Whispered through the wire, I'm American. Navy. I'm here to bring you home. Evelyn's voice softened. He looked at me like I was a hallucination, said, you're a woman. You're alone. Where's your team? A small smile crossed her face. I told him I am the team, and we're leaving. Now, she paused. I picked the locks. Took me 4 minutes. 4 minutes that felt like 4 hours every second, expecting alarm bells, searchlights, bullets. But the locks opened. The 3 men stumbled out of their cages. They could barely walk. Hayes had a broken leg that had healed wrong. Williams had infected wounds on his back from beatings. Carter was so malnourished he weighed maybe 90 pounds. Her smile faded. We made it 300 yards before the alarm sounded. The room seemed to grow colder. Someone had found the cut fence or noticed the empty cages, doesn't matter which. Alarm bells started screaming. Searchlights came on. I heard shouting in Russian. Heard boots running toward our position. Evelyn's breathing had gotten faster. I told them, run. Extraction point is 4 miles northeast. Stay together. Stay quiet. Run. Her hands were shaking again. We ran. Hayes supporting Williams. Carter trying to keep up despite his weakness. Me covering the rear rifle ready. We made it half a mile before the first shots rang out. She closed her eyes. Williams went down, center mass, through and through, arterial bleed. I could see it, even in the dark, the way blood pulsed out with each heartbeat. Too much blood, too fast. Her voice cracked. I returned fire, killed 3 guards, wounded 2 more, bought us maybe 90 seconds. Grabbed Williams under the arms and started dragging him. Hayes took one side, I took the other. Carter stumbled ahead, trying to clear a path. Tears were streaming down her face now. Williams was conscious, aware. He knew he was dying. He kept saying, "Leave me. Save yourselves. Leave me." Evelyn's voice broke completely. I told him, "Shut up, Marine. We don't leave people behind. You're going home." She sobbed once, harsh and ragged. He said, "Tell my wife. Tell Emily I tried to get home to her. Tell her I fought." Her hands covered her face. He died at mile 2.5. I felt it. The moment his weight changed from a wounded man fighting to stay alive to dead weight. But I kept dragging him. Because I'd promised. Because leaving his body meant leaving Emily with nothing. Because some promises you keep even when the person you promised is already gone. The room was silent except for Evelyn's ragged breathing. Mile 3.2 they caught up. I heard the grenade before I saw it. Heard it hit the ground behind me. Had maybe 2 seconds to react. Pushed Hayes and Carter down and tried to dive away. She looked down at her missing leg. Wasn't fast enough. Shrapnel tore through my right leg below the knee. I felt the bone shatter. Felt the heat of my own blood. Felt my leg just stop working. Stop being part of me. Her voice went clinical now. Detached. The only way to tell it. Arterial bleed. I could see it pulsing. I had maybe 3 minutes before I bled out. I pulled my belt off one-handed, made a tourniquet above the knee, pulled it tight enough that I screamed. Kept pulling until the bleeding slowed. She looked at Callahan. And then I got up. Or tried to. Leg wouldn't support weight. Bone was too damaged. So I crawled. Hayes and Carter tried to help, but they were too weak. So I crawled and they stumbled, and we moved together this broken unit of wounded and dying and dead, and we made for that extraction point, because stopping meant dying, and I was too angry to die yet. Evelyn's ice blue eyes were fierce now, despite the tears. Mile 4, helicopter landing zone. I could hear rotors. Could see the bird coming in. Hayes was screaming at the pilots to land. Carter was trying to pull me faster, and I was holding on to Williams's body because I'd promised to bring him home. Her voice softened. The crew jumped out. Navy corpsmen took one look at me and started yelling about blood loss and traumatic amputation. I told him, load the POWS first. Load Williams's body, then me. She smiled grimly. He argued. I pulled my sidearm, told him the live ones go first. The dead Marine goes second. I go last. Those are the priorities. Follow them or I shoot you and load them myself. Steele made a sound between a laugh and assumed. They loaded Hayes, loaded Carter, loaded Williams's body with more care than you'd think they'd show for a KYA from a mission that didn't exist. And then they loaded me. Evelyn's voice went quiet. I passed out from blood loss approximately 30 seconds after they got me secured in the bird. My last thought before everything went dark was, they're safe. Williams's wife gets a body to bury. Hayes and Carter go home. It was worth it. She looked at them. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital in Germany. My leg was gone. My career was over. And a naval intelligence officer was sitting beside my bed with a folder full of papers and a look on his face that told me my problems were just beginning. The confession hung in the air like smoke from a doused fire. Callahan's voice was rough. What did they tell you? They told me the rescue never happened, that the POWS had been recovered during a routine Marine reconnaissance patrol, that Corporal Williams had died during the extraction, but his death was classified under different circumstances, that my leg had been lost in a training accident. Evelyn's jaw clenched. And then they gave me a choice. The officer laid it out very clearly, very calmly, very professionally. She closed her eyes, reciting from memory. He said, Captain Blackwood, you disobeyed direct orders from your chain of command. You conducted an unauthorized military operation on foreign soil during sensitive diplomatic negotiations. You created an international incident that could have derailed years of careful diplomacy. You put American lives at risk, including your own, for a mission that was explicitly forbidden. Her eyes opened. He said we could court-martial you, charge you with insubordination, reckless endangerment, unauthorized military action. You'd spend the next 20 years in Leavenworth. Your family would know you as a criminal. Your service would be remembered as a cautionary tale. She paused. Or you could take option 2, sign the non-disclosure agreement, accept medical discharge with full disability benefits. Agree to never speak of Operation Silent Shadow or any related missions. Allow your service record to be altered to remove all classified operations. Disappear into the VA system under a modified identity for medical purposes. Evelyn's voice went hollow. I asked, what about Hayes and Carter? What about Williams's widow? Her hands tightened on the armrests. He said they've been debriefed and sworn to secrecy under threat of prosecution. Corporal Williams's widow will be told he died in a classified training accident. She'll receive death benefits and a flag. Nothing more. She will never know the truth about how her husband died or who tried to save him. The injustice of it hung in the room like a physical presence. I asked, so I saved 3 lives, lose my leg doing it, and the price is that I never existed. Evelyn's voice broke. He said, the price is that you made the wrong choice. You chose loyalty to 3 soldiers over loyalty to your nation's strategic interests. You chose emotion over duty. You chose to be a hero instead of an operator. And heroes make terrible intelligence assets because they can't be controlled. She looked at Callahan with eyes that had seen the worst betrayal. So I signed, because if I fought it, Hayes and Carter would be collateral damage. They'd be dragged through investigations, their stories picked apart, their lives destroyed. And Williams's widow would learn that the government had lied to her, that her husband's death was wrapped in classified operations that would never give her closure. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper now. I signed because protecting them was more important than protecting myself. I signed because after 7 years of operating in the shadows, I was so tired of fighting that disappearing seemed easier than struggling. She paused. And I signed because I knew that if I didn't, the story of Jamie and Becca and Will and Harry would disappear too. At least this way I'd be alive to remember them, even if nobody else could know. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Martinez spoke, his young voice shaking. What happened after you signed? They moved me through the medical system. New identity for hospital records. Evelyn Blackwood ceased to exist in any official capacity. I became just another disabled veteran in the VA system. Another wheelchair in another corridor. Another forgotten soldier whose service couldn't be acknowledged. She looked around the consultation room at the scarred table and cheap chairs and fluorescent lights. I spent 47 years in that cage. The cage I built by saving Hayes and Carter. The cage I accepted as the price of doing the right thing. 47 years of sitting in rooms like this carrying ghosts nobody else could see, remembering missions nobody else could acknowledge. Evelyn's voice strengthened slightly. I tried to find Hayes, tried to find Carter, tried to find Williams's widow just to tell her anonymously that her husband died. Bravely died fighting to escape, died in the arms of someone who cared. But every attempt was blocked. Every avenue led nowhere. The erasure was complete. She looked at the wooden box with the dog tags. So I carried them all. Jamie, Becca, Will, Harry, Williams, the 17 people I killed. The 22 ghosts total, carried them alone for 47 years, sitting in VA hospitals, going to physical therapy for a leg that wasn't there anymore. Waking up screaming from nightmares that I couldn't tell the therapist about because the missions were still classified. Her ice blue eyes met Callahan's. Until 3 months ago, until someone found me. The air in the room changed. Everyone leaned forward. What do you mean? Callahan asked carefully. Evelyn looked toward the door. I told you I tried to find Hayes and Carter, that every attempt was blocked. She paused, and for the first time since she'd started talking, something like hope flickered in her ice blue eyes. What I didn't tell you was that 3 months ago I got a visitor, someone who'd been searching for me just as hard as I'd been searching for them. Before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. Master Chief Steele opened it. A man stood there, maybe 43 years old, navy dress uniform, senior chief insignia on his collar. He had dark hair going gray at the temples, sharp eyes that carried the same intensity as Evelyn's, and a face that showed the weathering of someone who'd spent years in the teams. Captain Blackwood, he said formally, permission to join. Evelyn smiled, really smiled. For the first time since they'd entered this room, her face transformed from weathered stone into something human and warm and alive. Permission granted, Senior Chief. The man entered, stood at attention before Admiral Callahan, saluted crisply. Sir, Senior Chief Nathan Hayes, SEAL Team 5, Naval Special Warfare Command. The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. Callahan's face went white. Steele grabbed the doorframe for support. Jackson and Martinez both inhaled sharply, looking between Nathan and Evelyn like they were watching something impossible unfold. Hayes, Callahan repeated slowly, as in my father was Staff Sergeant Thomas Hayes, United States Army. Nathan's voice was controlled, but barely. Emotion threaded through every word. One of the prisoners of war Captain Blackwood rescued on March 14, 1979. The room erupted. Jackson started to speak, but couldn't find words. Martinez had tears already forming. Steele was staring at Nathan like seeing a ghost made flesh. Nathan continued, his voice steady despite the emotion. My father lived until January 17, 2019. He was 73 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep at his home in Charleston, South Carolina, surrounded by his family. He paused and his voice thickened. Surrounded by me, by my two sisters, Emma and Grace, by his 5 grandchildren, by my mother who'd been married to him for 38 years. Nathan looked at Evelyn and tears were streaming freely down his face now. All of us exist because one woman refused to obey an order to abandon him. Evelyn was crying too, hands pressed to her mouth, shoulders shaking with sobs that came from a place that had been locked down for 47 years. Nathan stepped closer to her wheelchair. Captain, my father spent 40 years searching for you. Every database, every contact, every channel he could access, or beg or borrow. He knew you were Navy, knew you were Special Operations, knew you'd saved him when everyone else had given up. But he couldn't find your name, couldn't find your record. It was like you'd never existed. His voice broke. He died not knowing your name, not knowing if you'd survived your wounds, not knowing if you'd been punished for saving him. But he died knowing what you did, knowing what you sacrificed. And he made me promise something. Nathan reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out something small. A challenge coin, tarnished silver worn smooth by decades of handling. On one side, an Army Special Forces crest. On the other, engraving that had been added later, the letters slightly uneven, like someone had done it by hand. He knelt beside Evelyn's wheelchair and held the coin out so she could see it. The engraving read, "To Shadow One you gave me 40 more years. You gave me a family. I died knowing angels are real." T. Hayes, 2019. Evelyn stared at the coin like it was made of something more precious than any metal on earth. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, and when Nathan placed it in her palm, she clutched it to her chest and sobbed. 40 years, she whispered. He had 40 more years. He had 40 more years because you said no when your government told you to walk away. Nathan's voice was strong now, carrying the weight of a son honoring his father's memory. Every Christmas morning with my mother, every birthday party, every baseball game I played where he was in the stands. Every time he helped one of his students who was struggling. Every grandchild he held. Every sunset he watched. Every moment of my in love and life. Nathan's voice rang through the consultation room. All of it happened because you chose to disobey, because you chose right over orders, because you chose 3 lives over your career and your safety and your future. He reached out and took her free hand, holding it gently. My father met my mother, Catherine, in 1980 at a church social. He told me he almost didn't go because he was still processing what had happened, still dealing with the trauma. But he went, and he met her, and they fell in love. Nathan smiled through his tears. They married in 1981. I was born in 1983. My sister Emma in 1985. Grace in 1987. He became a high school counselor. Worked at the same school for 30 years. Helped thousands of kids. Saved more lives than he ever took in the Army. His grip on her hand tightened. He never stopped looking for you, Captain. Every year on March 14th, the anniversary of the rescue, he'd raise a glass and toast. He'd say, "To the angel who refused to leave us behind." He called you his angel because you appeared out of nowhere, one woman against an army, and you brought him home when the whole world had written him off as dead. Evelyn was openly weeping now. 47 years of grief and loneliness, and wondering if it had all been worth it, finally finding their answer in the weight of a challenge coin and the testimony of a son who existed because she'd made an impossible choice. Nathan continued, his voice gentle but insistent. Before he died, he wrote a letter, sealed it, gave it to me. He said, "Son, if you ever find Shadow One, if you ever learn who saved us, give them this. Tell them thank you will never be enough. Tell them they gave me everything." He pulled an envelope from his other pocket, worn, yellowed slightly with age. Evelyn's name written on it in shaky handwriting. Captain Evelyn Blackwood, Shadow One. Evelyn took it with trembling hands, opened it carefully like it might disintegrate at rough handling. Inside a single sheet of paper covered in the same shaky script, she read aloud, her voice breaking every few words. "Dear Shadow One, I don't know your name. I don't know if you survived your wounds. I don't know if the government punished you for saving me. But I know what you did. I know you came for me when everyone else said to leave me behind. I know you carried my friend Daniel until you couldn't carry anymore. I know you lost your leg getting me home. And I know that every moment of happiness I've had in the 40 years since you saved me is because you refused to obey an order to abandon me. I've lived a good life, a full life, a life surrounded by love. I got to be a husband, a father, a grandfather, a teacher, a friend. I got to watch sunrises and tell jokes and hold my grandchildren and grow old with the woman I love. All because of you. If you're reading this, it means my son found you. It means you know that you mattered, that what you did mattered, that the price you paid wasn't for nothing. Thank you doesn't cover it. There are no words that cover it. So I'll just say this. You gave me everything, every moment, every breath, every smile, every tear. All of it is yours. All of it exists because you chose to be brave when it would have been easier to walk away. I died knowing angels are real because I met one in March of 1979. With eternal gratitude, Thomas Hayes, Staff Sergeant, United States Army. The room was silent except for the sound of people crying. Even Admiral Callahan had tears streaming down his weathered face. Steele was openly sobbing. Jackson and Martinez were holding on to each other for support. Evelyn clutched the letter to her chest, the challenge coin still gripped in her other hand, and she cried. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place that had been carrying unbearable weight for nearly half a century. Nathan knelt there beside her, one hand on her shoulder, letting her cry. Letting 47 years of silence and grief and wondering finally break open and pour out. When she could finally speak, her voice was raw, broken, but somehow stronger than it had been. I thought maybe he blamed me, for Williams, for not saving all three, for getting them captured in the first place because I broke protocol. Nathan shook his head firmly. He didn't blame you, Captain. He honored you every single day. He told us stories when we were kids. Never your name, he didn't know it. Never the details he'd been sworn to secrecy. But he told us about courage, about someone who came for him when everyone else had given up, about what it means to do right even when it costs everything. He smiled through his tears. My father taught me what honor looks like, what sacrifice means, what it means to be willing to pay any price to bring your brothers home. That's why I became a SEAL captain, because of the lessons you taught my father, lessons he passed to me. Admiral Callahan stood slowly. His face was red, his hands were shaking, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of command authority tempered by profound emotion. Captain Evelyn Blackwood, he said formally, what was done to you is unconscionable. You saved American lives. You served with honor and courage that defies measurement. You paid a price that no one should have to pay. And you've carried that burden alone for 47 years. He paused. That ends today. With your permission, I want to document your story. I want to honor the shadow operators who died. I want to create a memorial so their names are never forgotten. And I want to make that what you did, what you sacrificed, is acknowledged the way it should have been in 1979. Evelyn looked at him, at Nathan, at the room full of SEALs who now knew her story. What are you proposing? She asked quietly. Classified oral history, restricted to SEAL community access only. Not public, will protect the operational details. But within the teams, you and your teammates will be honored. Memorial wall at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Training curriculum incorporating the techniques you learned. Recognition within the Brotherhood for what you accomplished and what you lost. Callahan's voice was firm. Nobody gets left behind, Captain. Not on the battlefield. Not in memory. Not anymore. Something in Evelyn's face changed. The ice that had held her together for 47 years began to crack, to melt, to transform into something softer and warmer and alive. She looked at Nathan, at the challenge coin, at Thomas Hayes's letter. She looked at the wooden box with Jamie and Becca's dog tags. She looked at Harry Drake's notebook full of knowledge that had kept her alive, and she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay, document it. Remember them. Just tell it true. No hero worship. No sanitizing the ugly parts. Tell it like it was. The fear, the killing, the loneliness, the cost. She looked at each of them. Tell them I'd do it again. I'd volunteer again. I'd go back behind that curtain. Because Hayes got 40 more years. Because Carter got to go home. Because Williams's widow got a body to bury. Because someone had to do it, and I was able. Her ice blue eyes were fierce now. That's what being a SEAL means. Doing what needs to be done. Paying whatever price is required. And living with the consequences. Admiral Callahan came to attention, and then he saluted. Not the protocol salute of rank to rank, but something deeper. The salute of one warrior honoring another who had paid a price beyond measuring. Shadow 1, he said. The teams remember, and we won't forget again. Everyone in the room came to attention and saluted Evelyn Blackwood. The woman who'd saved 2 lives, carried 22 ghosts, and spent 47 years invisible. She returned the salute with a shaking hand, tears streaming down her weathered face, holding a challenge coin and a letter that proved her service had mattered after all. And for the first time in 47 years, Captain Evelyn Blackwood felt seen. 8 months later, Admiral Richard Callahan stood in the secure briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Center, Coronado, California. Before him sat 40 SEAL operators, instructors, senior enlisted leaders, officers from across Naval Special Warfare Command, some active duty, some retired, all of them there because they'd received a classified summons that said only operational history briefing, mandatory attendance, top secret clearance required. On the screen behind Callahan was a single photograph. A young woman in BUD/S training gear, 1972. 22 years old, dark hair pulled back, ice blue eyes staring at the camera with fierce determination. Strong, confident, whole. "Gentlemen," Callahan began. His voice was steady, but those who knew him could hear the emotion underneath. "What I'm about to share with you is classified at the highest levels. It will not leave this room. It will not be discussed outside secure spaces. But it needs to be told because it's part of our history, part of who we are as SEALs." He clicked to the next slide. A worn challenge coin appeared on screen. On one side, the SEAL trident. On the other, engraved words, Shadow 1. For 47 years, we've told stories about Shadow 1. We've used that call sign as motivation for BUD/S candidates, as an example of what a SEAL can accomplish operating alone in denied territory. We've treated Shadow 1 as a legend, a myth, an ideal to aspire to. Callahan paused and his voice strengthened. Shadow 1 is real. Her name is Evelyn Blackwood, and she's sitting in the back of this room. 40 heads turned as one. Evelyn sat in her wheelchair in the back corner. She was wearing her original SEAL Team 1 jacket. Callahan had found it in a storage unit she hadn't opened in decades, had it cleaned and presented to her 3 months ago. Her silver hair was cropped short. Her ice blue eyes were clear. Her hands trembled slightly on the armrest, but her spine was straight. The room erupted in spontaneous applause. These were hard men, warriors who'd seen combat across multiple theaters, operators who'd run missions in countries most people couldn't find on a map. And they stood as one to honor a woman most of them had thought was fictional. Evelyn didn't smile, didn't wave, just sat there accepting the recognition with the same quiet dignity she'd shown in the VA hospital 8 months ago. When the room settled, Callahan continued. Over the past 8 months, we've conducted an extensive classified oral history with Captain Blackwood. Master Chief Steele and I have spent over 60 hours documenting her 13 shadow missions in detail. We've corroborated what we could through declassified intelligence reports and operational summaries. We've verified her story through multiple independent sources. He looked at Evelyn, and we've confirmed that everything she told us is true. Operation Silent Shadow existed. 5 operators ran missions between 1972 and 1979. 4 of them died or disappeared. Only Captain Blackwood survived. Master Chief Graham Steele stood up from the front row. His voice was rough with emotion. For those who don't know, I had the privilege of interviewing Captain Blackwood extensively, recording her missions, her experiences, her lessons learned. And I want to share something she told me that I think every SEAL needs to hear. He looked at Evelyn, who nodded permission. Captain Blackwood said that the hardest part of shadow operations wasn't the danger. It wasn't the isolation. It wasn't even the fact that she had to kill 17 people with her hands and a knife. The hardest part was coming home and not being able to tell anyone what she'd done, not being able to grieve with her brothers, not being able to process the trauma because officially she didn't exist. Steele's voice thickened. She said she spent 47 years in her own cage. The POWs she rescued got to go home to their families and rebuild their lives. But she came home to silence, to erasure, to a government that asked her to do impossible things and then denied she existed when she did them too well. He paused and his voice dropped to barely above a whisper. She told me if I could change one thing, it wouldn't be the missions. It wouldn't be the leg I lost or the friends who died. It would be having brothers to share the burden with. Because no one should carry that weight alone. No one should have to be invisible for doing the right thing. Steele sat down, wiping his eyes. Callahan clicked to the next slide. A memorial wall design appeared. Black granite. 5 names engraved in clean, precise letters. Lieutenant James Brennan, Shadow 2, 1972. Captain Rebecca Thornton, Shadow 3, 1974. Chief Petty Officer William Ashford, Shadow 4, 1976. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Drake, Shadow 5, 1976. Captain Evelyn Blackwood, Shadow 1. Survived We're creating a classified memorial at the Naval Special Warfare Center, Callahan said. It will be accessible only to SEAL community members with appropriate clearances. It will honor the 5 shadow operators, 4 who gave everything, 1 who carried them all. He clicked again. Another slide. Training curriculum outline. We're also incorporating Captain Blackwood's experiences into advanced training. Not just the tactics, many of those are outdated, but the psychological preparation. How to operate under extreme isolation. How to process trauma. How to come home from missions that break you and find a way to keep serving. How to ensure that no operator ever feels erased or forgotten again. One of the younger officers raised his hand. Admiral, will Captain Blackwood be involved in the training? Only if she wants to be, Callahan said, looking at Evelyn. We've asked. She's considering it. Evelyn's voice came from the back, stronger than it had been in the hospital all those months ago. I'll do it, but not to glorify what I did, to warn you what it costs, to make sure none of you ever have to carry what I carried. The belief that you don't matter, that your service doesn't count, that you're alone. She wheeled herself forward slowly. The room parted to let her pass operators, stepping aside with respect that bordered on reverence. When she reached the front, she turned her wheelchair to face the assembled SEALs. I volunteered for shadow operations because I thought I was tough enough, smart enough, good enough to handle anything. I was wrong. No one is tough enough to handle that kind of isolation without paying a price. I survived the missions, but I didn't survive them whole. Her voice was raw now, vulnerable in a way that made these hard men lean forward, hanging on every word. I lost 47 years of being part of the teams, 47 years of brotherhood, 47 years of knowing I mattered. I can never get that back. She looked at each of them in turn. So learn from my mistake. Don't romanticize isolation. Don't think you're strong enough to do it alone. The teams exist because we're better together than apart, because we share the burden, because we bring each other home, not just from the battlefield, but from the darkness that follows us after. A SEAL in the third row stood up, Senior Chief Nathan Hayes. Everyone in the room knew who he was by now, knew his story, knew why he was here. Captain Blackwood, Nathan said, his voice formal but thick with emotion. My name is Nathan Hayes. My father was a Staff Sergeant Thomas Hayes, United States Army, one of the prisoners of war you rescued in 1979. Even though everyone knew hearing it said out loud in this room carried weight that made the moment feel sacred. My father lived until 2019, 73 years old, died peacefully, surrounded by family. Me, my 2 sisters, 5 grandchildren. Nathan's voice broke. He told me about the rescue. He was sworn to secrecy about the details, but he told me that a Navy SEAL came for him when everyone else had given up, that the SEAL lost her leg getting him out, that he owed his life to someone whose name he never learned. He walked forward, pulled something from his pocket. Before he died, he gave me this, the same challenge coin, tarnished silver, worn from handling, the engraving visible even from across the room. He told me, if you ever find Shadow One, give this back. Tell her she gave me 40 more years. Tell her thank you will never be enough. Nathan placed the coin on the table in front of Evelyn. Captain, my father got 40 more years. He met my mother in 1980. They married in 1981, had me in 1983, my sisters in 85 and 87. He became a teacher, helped thousands of kids, lived to see his grandchildren, lived to celebrate his 70th birthday, surrounded by everyone he loved. His voice rang through the briefing room. All of that, my life, my sisters' lives, his students, his grandchildren, all of it exists because you refused to leave him behind. Evelyn couldn't speak, could only hold the coin and cry, while the weight of 47 years of wondering finally lifted. Admiral Callahan let the moment settle, let it sink into every person in that room. Then he spoke quietly. This is why we do what we do. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for this, for giving people more years, more life, more chances to love and be loved. He looked at the assembled SEALs. Captain Blackwood's story is classified, but the lesson isn't. The lesson is that every mission matters. Every life saved ripples forward through time, and no operator should ever feel erased, forgotten, or alone. His voice strengthened. We are brothers and sisters. We carry each other, and we make sure the sacrifices are honored. The room stood as one coming to attention, saluting Evelyn Blackwood. Not the legend, not Shadow One, the woman, the SEAL who'd given everything and received nothing in return for 47 years. Evelyn returned the salute, tears streaming down her weathered face, holding a challenge coin from a man she'd saved, finally understanding that her service had mattered. that she had mattered, that she still mattered. 2 years later, on a cold February morning in 2028, Captain Evelyn Blackwood passed away at Naval Medical Center, San Diego. She was 78 years old. Her funeral at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery was attended by over 300 Naval Special Warfare personnel. The sky was gray. Rain threatened but held off as if the heavens themselves were waiting to see her honored properly. Admiral Callahan gave the eulogy. His voice carried across the assembled crowd strong despite the emotion. Captain Evelyn Blackwood taught us that legends are born from real people who do impossible things at impossible cost. She taught us that the weight of service doesn't end when the mission ends. She taught us that isolation isn't strength. Brotherhood is strength. And she taught us that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones who survive long enough to teach the rest of us what honor really means. He paused, looking at the flag-draped casket. Shadow 1 operated in darkness for 7 years. She was erased for 47 more. But in her final 2 years, she stepped into the light. She taught. She shared. She made sure that every operator who came after her would know you are not alone. You are seen. You matter. 12 SEALs stood at attention beside the casket. All women. All graduates of BUD/S from the past 2 years. All of them trained in part by Evelyn Blackwood. They lifted the casket in perfect unison, carried it with precision and care to the gravesite. Nathan Hayes stepped forward. In his hands, the challenge coin his father had carried for 40 years. He placed it gently on the casket before it was lowered into the ground. "Captain," he said quietly, "my father asked me to make sure you knew. You gave him everything, and through him, you gave me everything. Rest easy, Shadow 1. You brought him home, and now we bring you home." The honor guard raised their rifles. 7 men, 7 rifles, 3 volleys. 21 shots rang out across the cemetery. A single bugler played taps. The mournful notes carried on the cold air, saying goodbye to a warrior who'd served in silence and finally found peace. The flag was folded with precision, presented to Admiral Callahan, who accepted it with full honors. And as the assembled crowd came to attention one final time, a formation of helicopters passed overhead. 4 birds in formation, 1 position conspicuously empty. The missing man formation, for the woman who'd operated alone so others wouldn't have to. At the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, the memorial wall stood in a secure corridor accessible only to those with proper clearances. Black granite, 5 names in gold lettering. Lieutenant James Brennan, Shadow 2, 1972. Captain Rebecca Thornton, Shadow 3, 1974. Chief Petty Officer William Ashford, Shadow 4, 1976. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison Drake, Shadow 5, 1976. Captain Evelyn Blackwood, Shadow 1, 1972 to 2028. Beneath the names, a plaque with Evelyn's final words given during her last training session 3 weeks before she died. "The shadows kept me alive, but brotherhood brought me home. Never operate alone. Never let a brother or sister be forgotten. Never stop bringing each other back. Not from battlefields, not from silence, not from darkness. We are SEALs. We leave no one behind, not in life, not in memory, not ever." Every SEAL who graduated from BUD/S now visited that memorial. They learned the real story, not the legend, but the truth. The cost of isolation, the weight of service, the reason the teams existed. Senior Chief Nathan Hayes retired from the Navy in 2029 after 28 years of service. His final assignment was as an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Center. On his last day, he placed a photograph at the Shadow Operators Memorial. It showed his father healthy and smiling, surrounded by family at his 70th birthday party in 2016. Catherine Hayes beside him. Nathan and his sisters. 5 grandchildren. Everyone Thomas Hayes had lived to love because one woman had refused to abandon him. Beneath the photo, Nathan placed a handwritten note. "Dad got 40 more years because Shadow 1 refused to leave him behind. I got a lifetime with my father. My children got a grandfather who taught them what courage means. All because Captain Evelyn Blackwood chose right over easy. Thank you will never be enough. But we'll keep saying it anyway. We'll keep teaching it. We'll keep making sure no one forgets." Shadow 1 lives in every operator who brings their teammates home, in every choice to do right when orders say otherwise, in every SEAL who refuses to let a brother or sister be invisible. She taught us what it means to serve, what it costs, and why it matters. Rest in peace, Captain. You're home now. In the training rooms of the Naval Special Warfare Center, a new generation of SEALs learned from Harry Drake's protocols and Will Ashford's techniques and Evelyn Blackwood's hard-won wisdom. They learned that technology fails, but knowledge endures. They learned that isolation breaks you, but brotherhood builds you. They learned that some orders need to be disobeyed, and some prices need to be paid, and some sacrifices echo forward through generations. And they learned that being invisible isn't the same as not mattering. That sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones the world tries to erase. That strength isn't operating alone, it's refusing to let anyone else have to. On the wall of every Bud/S training facility, a new addition appeared. A photograph of 12 female SEALs in dress uniforms standing at attention before the Shadow Operators Memorial. Each one wore a unit patch on their shoulder, a simple design, a shadow in the shape of the SEAL trident, and beneath it 3 words, Shadow Won Lives. Because Evelyn Blackwood had taught them that legends die, but legacies endure. That erasure is temporary, but impact is eternal. That one person choosing to do right, no matter the kind, can ripple forward through time and touch lives they'll never see. 40 years after she rescued him, Thomas Hayes got to hold his grandchildren. 43 years after she rescued him, his son became a SEAL because of the lessons she'd taught. 49 years after she was erased, she stepped into the light and taught a new generation what service really means. And 56 years after she became Shadow, one Evelyn Blackwood finally came home. Not to silence, not to erasure, but to honor, to memory, to brotherhood, to the only place that had ever really mattered, the teams, where no one operates alone, where no one is forgotten, where every warrior, no matter how long they've been invisible, is finally seen. Shadow One had taught them well, and they would never forget.